Good evening and welcome to Generation Movie on a Monday night in September as we get ready for spooky season. But first, we have to finish 80s raunch comedies, Rich.
That's right.
How are you doing tonight, my friend? How is everything going for you? How are you feeling? What's going on?
I'm doing okay. I sat down to watch a screener for a movie that's going to be dropping on Netflix on Friday. And I'm about 10 minutes into it, and I go, I think I've seen this before. And then I looked, and I had seen it back during Sundance in January. And I felt like such a moron for a few minutes there. I was like, oh, yeah, I've seen this already, haven't I?
That wonderful feeling when movies just flow one into the other, and you don't know where you are.
It was a little too strong to be just random deja vu.
Well, I was discussing that. I feel like as you get older, you have more deja vu. Like, I've fucking been here before. I spent the afternoon. Well, first I always watch whatever movie we're doing. So I watched Casual Sex, and then I watched, and I just did a mini review before we came on here with an outfit change and everything.
Oh.
I just did a mini review because I think No One Will Save You is the prey of the fall Hulu movie season. So
interesting.
It's Caitlin Dever. It is a hybrid alien invasion / home invasion movie. So like the one I had said was Panic Room meets Signs is the player, like the player, give me the pitch.
Yeah, that's your elevator pitch. I like.
It's Signs meets Panic Room, which is good Fincher. You know what I mean? Like, it's great Fincher actually.
Yes.
But it's one of those movies. This guy that made it is Brian Duffield. He's made a bunch of movies that are kind of like right on the cusp of becoming mainstream hits, like Love and Monsters and Spontaneous, and he's responsible for the Skull Island show on Netflix, and he's just this great young writer director. Both Babysitter movies he's had a part in. The Babysitter movies on Netflix that are really great, and the second one that was batshit insane. So he has a really good feeling for horror and sci-fi and all those elements, and he gets the most luck ever for a director. He gets Caitlin Dever, who is of course from Booksmart and a few seasons of Justified. The incredible, just an incredible young actress. Recently in Dope Sick, just an incredible young actress, and the movie hinges on her. And it's an hour and a half, and it just moves. It has it's like one of those movies that and I just think it's going to be one of the movies that genre folks are going to be talking about for years to come. It's just it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It just makes a really good wheel. You know what I mean? Like, And I
yeah.
think go ahead.
I wonder though, is this going to be the season then for good genre films that people are going to be talking about for years to come? Because this coming week, and I'm seeing
The
it
creator,
tomorrow.
I said it. The creator. Yeah, I mean,
I'm very psyched for this. Ever since I saw that first trailer, I was like, oh, this looks amazing. This looks sprawling. It looks epic. It looks new. It's an original thought
fresh.
here.
Well, and
and it lands at a time when we're dealing with questions about AI, and so I think it's very timely as well.
And this one very similar,
really
in the same boat. Well, I hope people are going to go see it too, and not. Well, first off, it's the ultimate test for film goers, right? This weekend, you say you want new, you say you want original, you say stop sending us reboots and retreads. Hey, if the creator does very well and Saw X doesn't, well then we've achieved our goals. But if it doesn't go that way, Rich, which I don't think it's going to, stop saying you want new and original, because you don't.
No.
And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting to me. As people who watch a lot of movies, everybody's like, everything's the same, nothing's new, nothing's original. And then the moment something is a reboot or a sequel or a retread, they immediately go out and see it. And then they're like, why don't we get anything new? It's like, you're literal self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of good new stuff recently.
There really has. And
I still say Bottoms was a really good comedy that should have performed better, as was Joyride from earlier in the summer. Dumb Money, which just came out, was fantastic. I thought it was like fantastic. Some great performances. Pete Davidson does a career best performance.
I don't know, Rich. The Nun 2 is out. That's what I mean. Like, we're in this position where I know you get bombarded with shit I get bombarded. I was just at a weekend with friends and all I heard was there's nothing original. Do something about it. And it's like, I go, you guys don't actually fucking want original. You don't want original. You want warm and cozy. You want something you've already seen before, so you don't have to. Like, we had a whole discussion about one of the things that happened where everybody's watching the movie before everybody's going to bed, and there was talk about putting on a new movie, and one of the things that was said was, don't put on a new movie. We can watch an old movie, and then we can fall asleep to the old movie. And that way,
they're not a fucking lullaby. You watch a movie to be entertained, reflect on the human condition, to experience something.
Yes.
You don't experience something when you're unconscious.
Can I tell you what the movie was to make you double down and just go, what? How can you relax? So the movie that was being watched was The Departed. And I'm like, I can't not, like, if I'm watching this movie, I'm fucking nervous every 3 seconds. How am I supposed to get comfortable and go to bed when I know, spoiler alert, many years later, I know Leo's going to get shot in the face. Like,
that keeps me awake.
Well, also, like, the dialogue is so crisp and everything. Like, so it was weird. It was a weird discussion. It was a weird, like, whatever. But I love my guys, but they were constantly. I'm excited about the creator. No one will save you though.
I do need to.
Great designs, good production, excellent editing, really good special effects. They look practical. So, like, I mean, I know there's some CGI.
I understand one of the main storytelling conceits of the film, and when I heard about it, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then I seem to recall there was something else coming out this fall that also does something similar. The new John Woo movie does something very similar.
Interesting.
In terms of.
Well, yeah, I'm always like, the best way without talking about the conceits. Film is supposed to be show me, don't tell me. Right? Show me, don't tell me. I would argue that after you see this movie, this may be one of the greatest versions of show me, don't tell me.
Yeah.
That you'll ever see. Because it's just one of those, which is interesting. Yeah, I don't want to give anything away. I'm trying to be a good boy.
Using a G.I. Joe comic book reference, but even that might have been too much. But
depending on who you're talking about, yeah.
But yeah, I don't want to spoil it. So,
but the other thing, that's another thing that happened over the weekend. I got accused of the spoiler thing, which was I was a little bit upset and sad about that. And then the person who was really mad at me, yeah, no, that's exactly, we're going to keep it on our hat. I just read your
okay.
chat.
Okay.
But
okay.
what I'm going to say to you is, it was really funny. There was this one person came in and looked at me, because there was a bunch of guys and we're just hanging out, drinking and having a good time. He walked in and he goes, "Have you watched Ahsoka?" And I go, "Oh, have I watched Ahsoka?" And then there were 3 guys who hadn't watched it or behind, and they were like, "Go away, stop talking." And I'm like, "Well, he won." And then we got in the corner. We were accused of being antisocial because we were talking about Ahsoka in the corner. It was an interesting weekend, but it was also like very stressful. And
without getting into spoilers, I'm finding this show kind of slow. I don't want to say glacial.
I think
is slow, I don't think this is going to get wrapped up in 2 weeks. I think this is very much went into this knowing they were going at least 2 seasons.
I think this is well, either 2 seasons or this is a spoiler, not a spoiler, but this particular past week appears to be a possibility that maybe we are not going to be playing in the same Star Wars galaxy that we've always played in. Is what I like. There is a distinct possibility that Dave Filoni might be rewriting the game as we speak in the middle of the game. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that is this is the same thing we're talking about Saw and the creator, right? So everybody complains Star Wars is too the same, to this, to that. Okay. The moment Star Wars does anything different, though, Rich, people flip the fuck out.
I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem. My other big problem with this show is I think it relies too much on 2 animated series that not everybody has
seen. That's very true. And but I think the other thing
it's a subtle form of gatekeeping almost, that you can't watch this show because you don't know who the Nightside Witches are. You don't know who Thrawn is. You don't know who Ezra is.
Well, if you don't know who Thrawn is, that means you didn't read the Heir to the Empire series, and frankly, you don't deserve to. But so I'm just throwing it out there. If you didn't read the Timothy Zahn books, you and I can't talk, right? I mean, you haven't read the Zahn books? Son of a bitch. Son of a bitch.
Okay, anyway, I'm going to say this. I have read them. I picked them up. Like the first one, I almost flunked all my finals in college.
That's fine.
That they came out because I couldn't put that book down. Timothy Zahn was already a favorite author of mine, thanks to a novella of his called Cascade Point from a few years earlier.
I think
I have put my 3 signed Thrawn trilogy books up on eBay recently, like a couple of days ago. So
I'm sure. Well, you're going to be very happy. I think.
Yeah.
Other thing.
I'll tell you about the bidding off mic.
Oh, that's fine. The pacing on Ahsoka is one thing. It's been slow, and also it kind of fills into that narrative that the Marvel shows and the Disney shows spend a few, like 1 or 2 extra episodes just to, like, I feel like it'd be 6. Most of them could be 6 episodes. The other thing that I would say to you before we get to comments, I think everybody came in thinking, first off, Ahsoka in The Mandalorian was kind of whimsical. She was funny. She was tough. And in this one, when she has all of her baggage from Rebels and the Clone Wars, she's not nearly as much fun as that sequence with her on The Mandalorian, talking to Grogu, saying, "Who do you want to go with?" You know what I mean? Like like Grogu has an amazing way of making everybody a little bit happier. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so what I think has happened is that when people have come into it, this is Rebels Ahsoka. This is Rebels Sabine Wren, right? The colors are a little muted. Everybody's a little bit, and you have to give them a little bit of angst. And one of the things that we like right now, Star Wars fans don't really enjoy, although Andor is the best Star Wars show we've had,
Oh,
the
good Lord.
angst of characters that we want to and just enjoy for enjoy sake, right? They don't
Mhm.
get they really don't like the angst. Andor was a show that was on the ground level of everything, and everybody kind of like just fell in love with it. But it wasn't like characters that were gonna go, hey, you know that Andor guy seems happy, right? Ahsoka's
True.
you know what I mean? And so I think that's part of it. But let's get to some comments, and then we're gonna talk about the other major big news of the week. But first, some
Yes.
comments. Good evening, gentlemen. Great review earlier, JW. Queuing it up. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you. Joe has encouraged me to do more movie reviews in a short time frame, and that's what we're working on. Ken McKernan, good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Welcome from Canada. We appreciate you. A little jealous of the movies Ritz gets to watch early and review. Can't wait to see Chasing Amy. Yeah,
That's finally coming out, isn't it?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
you were right there. Killer
Yeah, I
Kites,
saw it at Tribeca, and I think it's a really solid documentary.
Abby.
That's ultimately isn't so much about Kevin Smith as it is about the documentarian and their journey. But I think it's still interesting because it talks about how movies affect our lives and how, we could take those lessons that
Even
we learned.
yes, the lessons we learn from movies and not actually like a movie that we might love at some point in our life. As our life progresses, we might not be in love with it in quite the same way. Killer Kites,
Mhm.
Abby inherits a kite that goes on a killing spree. Actual movie, I shit you not. Let's not forget Slaughterhouse, which I can't wait to see. I cannot wait. A sloth that goes on a killing spree. Come on now.
What was it? The Patton Oswalt does the routine about an actual movie called, was it? Oh, Deathbed, the bed that murders people.
Yeah, Deathbed. That's a great stuff. JW, will you guys be discussing the Continental tomorrow night? I'm curious about it. I think we are going to be discussing the Continental. I haven't watched it yet, Joe, because again, I was on a mission to see some guys in Pennsylvania this week. So Joe was sending me messages, and I was like responding, and Joe was like, "Yep, tired," just because I about 2,200 miles in the last 4 days, so I'm a little.
Dude,
I'm a little.
hold up.
Go ahead.
You were in Pennsylvania and you didn't give me a fucking call?
I was in Pennsylvania, but I was in a cabin in the middle of the woods.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wasn't. I wasn't anywhere near you. If I was near a movie theater or a place to get food, it would have been you. I was at a cabin, a rainy cabin, by the way. The fucking
Yeah, the
it was
weather was shit this weekend.
fucking awful, and I was cold. I was legit super cold because as a Floridian now, my blood is apparently paper thin.
Yeah, it was a frigid 72 degrees in Pennsylvania this weekend. I'm so sorry.
Kathy writes, I agree with JW. Kathy, you're okay. Maybe I was gonna say you're gonna need to get more specific. I've said a lot of stuff in the last 18 minutes. Heir to the Empire was amazing. Yes, I said a lot of stuff about the Star Wars fandom that I think has potential every once in a while. The very small vocal minority every once in a while can be worse than the Snyder fandom. Takes a lot, but sometimes it happens. I am happy. That's one thing about the Star Wars shows I will say, Rich. I'm super happy that a lot of the folks that have gotten shit on for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in our lives for stuff for choices they didn't make or have anything to do with, and they've kind of gotten abused. Those people on the Filoni shows have been able to get a really good kind of like, the idea that Hayden Christensen, I don't feel ever got a fair rap. Because think about being an actor of like somebody, say Ewan McGregor's quality, who really had to fight Lucas on almost everything. And Hayden Christensen comes in and he's a young guy who's just got the role of a lifetime. He's not going to say no to stuff. So I just let's see, a bunch of real low budget horror came out this week. Yeah, I don't know what the budget on No One Will Save You is. It looks like $1 million. It's got really interesting effects. It's got practical effects. It's got practical fighting, which is great. Hiss, I live in the cold. Yeah, the cold sucks. I understand. It doesn't matter. We're all going to be eventually because of climate change. We're all going to be in warm weather. So it's good, but I'm just telling
Mhm.
you, I was on Saturday night, I was in a full fleece. Now there is no way a fat person should be in fleece. It's just not right. And it's against the. But I was in. I had my wife had warned me that she packed really warm sweatpants, and I had to put them on. And I was just like, I was both sweating and freezing at the same time. Let's see. Breaking news: SAG after members have voted in favor of strike authorization against the video game industry.
Not surprised, honestly.
Deserved.
I knew that vote was today, and video game actors get screwed hard and without much lube. And honestly, I think this is going to be the fallout we're going to see for a little while, at least across the entertainment industry. Okay, granted, we haven't really hit it yet, but WGA, the Writers Guild, reached a tentative agreement last night at
Yes.
midnight with the producers, AMPTP, and still has to go through the lawyers writing everything up. Both sides review it to make sure nobody slipped something in that shouldn't be there, and then it goes out to the membership to be voted on. So the strike isn't over. The picketing is over for now. In fact, the WGA said, okay, guys, we're not going to picket anymore because we have this tentative agreement. But if you want to go help SAG, go right ahead because they were so cool to help us with our picketing before they went on strike. So you feel free to go and help them picket some more. So I don't think we're going to see too much of a difference in the numbers of people picketing. It's just what they're kind of picketing for right now.
Well, and I think what's going to happen again. I wrote it on my little byline here tonight. WGA first, SAG to come. Congrats on the new deals. Let's get them in place. Let's get everybody back to work. Let's stop this madness and just fix everything. I haven't had. I like things that I've really missed. You know what I really missed? I've missed late night shows. I'm a big believer in late night shows. It's something I've always wanted to be and do, and part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. So when I don't get my late night fix, I've been a little bit like, my wife finds me a little bit agitated at like 11:30 for some reason. Like I'm like, God damn it, I need my fucking funnies. It's like not having the color cartoons on a Sunday morning. And it's
Fair enough.
But I think the deal in place for WGA should be something that is going to be transferable to SAG, right? They should be.
There's a lot of overlap in their concern, SAG's concerns WGA's.
And also it should be something where they can pick it up. I think one of the things that SAG has to deal with is, unlike the WGA, there aren't writers, there aren't actors groups. Like if you're working on a television show, every actor is an individual contracted actor as opposed to a writing room. So I think, but it should be something where we can get something across and fix.
Yeah.
And
I think once we see the actual terms that the WGA and the AMPTP came together on, that's going to give us a pretty clear roadmap of what SAG and the Producers Guild will have in common versus what they'll still need to kind of negotiate out. How quickly they get to the table after this is resolved remains to be seen. But I have a feeling they're going to move fast because otherwise, if they don't have anything in place to get people back into,
it makes no sense. It makes no sense to not have both things taken care of, because you can have writers and then not have actors.
If people back to work by the middle, if they don't have actors on sets by the middle to late November, the rest of the fall, the rest of this year's season, television season is screwed. They won't be able to make 13 episodes for the back half of the season. At that point,
I just think it's something that's going to happen. There's two things left that I want to talk about, and then we'll talk about casual sex tonight. First off, rest in peace to David McCallum. You don't know who David McCallum is. You haven't watched it. Yeah, shame on you. Haven't watched the NCIS. But for Rich and I, my dad and I used to watch The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And The Man from, David McCallum, before he was on NCIS, as Dr. Donald Ducky Mallard on NCIS, he was Ilya Kuryakin on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And so he was a great actor, and he was just one of those actors that was in a lot of stuff and didn't necessarily get all the top billing all the time, but he was one of those actors that stole every goddamn scene he was in. So
true. In fact, if people want to, just set their DVRs right now, well, about 12 minutes ago, Turner Classics started showing
The Great Escape.
Great Escape, which he is in. And
yeah, you'll be up to about 3 a.m, but it's well worth your time.
Yeah, if you've never seen it before, yeah, it's well worth your time. What's kind of weird and funny, or weirdly funny about this? Yesterday, I was kind of surfing the algorithm wave on YouTube and just following recommended video. It was some film history stuff, and I came across a portion of a promotional film that was shot at the beginning of Man from U.N.C.L.E. that was, I think, probably only shown to network affiliates and advertisers, maybe, showing what that show was about. And the actors were in character, talking directly to the camera. Hello, my name is Ilya Kuryakin. I am an agent for U.N.C.L.E. And, we go out and have crazy adventures, or whatever, whatever whatever they had him say in that thing. And, it was something really interesting, so I was kind of watching this thinking, wow, nobody was expecting somebody to be watching this 60 some years later. But it's kind of cool that, we have this little promotional piece to look back on and see how they kind of presented the show.
Well, in the 60s, he was a, he had two big, Great Escape, like you mentioned, but he was also in The Greatest Story Ever Told with Max von Sydow playing Christ. He was Judas. He was Judas Iscariot. So it's like, he's very, he had some great roles. He later on in his life, he hit a lot of the TV shows and, guest starring roles where he was like an ace that would come in, Father Dowling Mysteries, Murder, She Wrote, Sequest, Babylon 5, Law and Order, Sex in the City. Like he was, so he, he was a guy that would show up for things, he basically, you think about shows like Jag and, all kinds of stuff. He even published his own mystery novel, Once a Crooked Man, in 2016. So he was a true Renaissance player. Speaking of crazy Renaissance stuff, really quick before we get going, I want to talk a bit. There's a Variety article about, I don't think it's Variety. I think it's in GQ. And I just want to say this, and I know there's a GQ article out about Martin Scorsese right now. And in the GQ article, Martin Scorsese is railing against comic book blockbuster films. He's railing against blockbusters, which is interesting because it's the only thing keeping theaters alive. And he's railing about all these different things. We need directors, we need quality directors, we need people that are going to rail against the comic book film. And it has to be brought up because your good friend and my good friend Bill Gadavakis brought it up. It has to be said loud and proud. During the entire GQ article, one of the things he's ripping on, that it's a danger to our culture. It's a danger because people aren't going to know what movies actually are and how important movies are. And I love him. I will always love Martin Scorsese. As a matter of fact, last night the tickets went on sale for Killers of the Flower Moon, and I'm all in. Okay. In the article, though, Rich, he talks about the Safdie brothers, who are great independent filmmakers, made Uncut Gems. They're really good. But he also mentions this guy, Christopher Nolan, and Nolan doesn't need any help. Nolan is actually, if you're talking about a filmmaker that is a maker of blockbusters and is a maker of films that, while important, all he does is make blockbusters, Rich. That's all he does. And 3 of them happen to be what, Rich?
superhero films.
Superhero film. So he got
Okay, well,
power, and so I
I know
you
it's
know what?
frustrating. It's frustrating,
Yeah,
and
it's just
I will
it's
admit, well,
stupid.
I'll give you a hint at what we're going to have dropping tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning on Film Buff Online, and that's the aforementioned Bill Gadavaskis wrote an entire editorial piece that we're
'Cause
going
it's
to. I
annoying.
was
It's
proofreading before we started, and that's going to be dropping tomorrow at 8 o'clock, where he kind of talks about these things. For myself, I look at Scorsese. I mean, the guy, when he talks about old movies, he's very much talking about a lot of genre stuff. He's talking about westerns. He's talking about gangster films, and
movies.
and he's talking about the artistry that was pioneered in those films. And I think he's falling into the trap that I hate when I see my friends fall into it on Facebook. And that is, everything that happened to me in my youth was important and great and wonderful because it happened to me. Anything that happens after age 30 sucks an enormous amount of dick because I'm now old and therefore it can't be
No
as good
fun.
as it was.
No
It's kind
fun.
of like a toxic nostalgia.
Well, it is like a toxic nostalgia, but it's also like the idea that a filmmaker and a film historian as brilliant as Scorsese cannot understand the concept that gangster movies and westerns are akin to comic book films and horror films,
Yeah.
right? Like
Now,
he can't see that they're
mhm.
that they have more in common than he wants to admit.
True. But
And
there's
that's
also, and where I do sort of see his point, but this isn't the
there's
fault
a
of
saturation point, of course.
blockbusters. It's the fault of studio management that it seems like these are the only big films anymore. And that's really a case where studios have stepped away from doing a $40 million movie, a $50 million movie, except for like A24 will, throw $8 million at a script and get a movie that brings them back $80 million. But outside of that, Warner's doesn't do a mid-range. Nobody does.
Nobody's
Fox,
taking any chances.
Disney.
It's not the
Yeah.
filmmakers or the people. It's very much
And it's frustrating because
when you get
I
into this discussion, it goes back to what we talked about, and we can kind of like move on. But it goes back to what I was talking about. You can say
yeah,
you
I
want
see
new.
his point to a certain extent.
Oh yeah,
But
there's a saturation point to comic
but I
book
think
movies.
he's misapplying what the cause of that is.
The causality of it, and the other thing he's missing is that basically what you're looking at when you're looking at him talking about this, he's basically missing the boat in the sense that the studios are only making what the audiences are going to see. It's not the audience. I am a firm believer that if you go see The Creator next week, we'll get 5 more sci-fi movies that are interesting, new, and engaging. If you go see Saw X next week, as much as we have fans of the genre on our on our page and everything, if you go see Saw X and you don't go see The Creator, I don't want to hear you bitching that we don't get anything original. And
Exactly.
it's the audience. It's not him. And
Uh-huh.
Scorsese, in a sense, the audience is passing by. You can say you love The Searchers, and most of the audience, a lot of the audience, the new audiences, they don't necessarily, unless they have a dad at home that watches westerns, know what the fuck he's talking about. So,
Sadly. Yeah.
so a couple things. Hi guys. Hi Wendy. Thank you for joining us.
Evening, Wendy. Thanks for popping
Wendy, of
by.
course, of the
Sticky
great show on
microphone.
the Indie Skip Network that we have.
Mhm.
So, and then let's see. You say just over 30 is old? Laugh out loud. Yes, Joe, he did.
No, well,
I
I'm
think
saying
it
that.
means
Can I clarify what I said?
yeah. No,
Okay. I'm saying that just because it felt like around the age of 30, that's when the MTV really sucks and doesn't show music videos anymore mindset kicked in. So late 90s, somewhere in there. And that's when I started to notice among my friends of like, oh, that stuff is new. Therefore, it's crap because it's different from what I liked when I was a teenager. And that's when I really started to see that kind of like weird generational thing happening. And I mean, I will listen to stuff and I go, "Well, that's okay," but it's kind of repeating the same ideas, the same tonalities of music from this era, this era, this era. But then again, I'm sure somebody in their 40s or 50s back in the 80s heard the Stray Cats and went, "Why are they repeating stuff from the 50s?"
Why are they doing that? Well,
Yeah,
and that's
so
the thing.
it's as you get older, you get a better historical perspective, and I think that's how you should be looking at things, not so much as well, it's different from when I was a kid. Things are different. Remember, I used to be able to go out and ride my bike, and kids don't ride their bikes anymore. And
I think that's perfect.
That attitude just kind of bores me.
That's what we do on the show, and that's what
Mhm.
we're going to do right now. Let's talk. That's what we do on our show. We look at older movies and try to get a gauge on what they bring to the table. And this movie has a lot of interesting stuff going on in it, right?
Mhm.
The movie we're talking about tonight is Casual Sex. It of course stars Leah Thompson and Viictoria Jackson. I just went up on that really quick. Viictoria Jackson and Andrew Dice Clay, and just a who's like a weird kind of hodgepodge of 80s comedy stars or whatever kind of stars you want to like. Because Leah Thompson didn't star in a ton of comedies, but she also starred in some big comedies. So let's talk about production. So not a lot of research on this movie. Very hard to pin some stuff down. But
yeah,
I think
that was one thing I found interesting was that no one's written about this movie at all, really, outside of like one or two interviews where Leah Thompson mentions it obliquely.
Yeah, but I was able to like, first off, it's a real interesting thing going on with this movie. And here's the thing. I'm going to preface this, Rich, with saying I don't know that I like the movie. I think the movie's messy, and I don't know that it's funny. And I think it could be a better serious dramedy than it is a comedy. But I also understand, in looking at the production, it starts off as a Groundling sketch, right?
Yeah.
It starts off as a Groundling show where Wendy Goldman and Judy Toll were the writers on the film. Basically, remember the Groundlings in L.A., and they basically during one of the productions, which was an improv sketch compilation called "Please Don't Eat the Groundlings," they created like a little 3-song musical sketch that was embedded throughout the show. So it was sort of like improv, casual sex sketch, improv, casual sex musical sketch, improv, and it was like a wafer thin mint, right? Where basically they were in between different things, and then it won a competition. It basically became a full-length production. And because at that point, the Groundlings were looking for alternate content to give unheard voices like women more of an opportunity. And so they created the play that basically reflected their own friendship. They were both single women in LA, working on different things, and working on trying to find the right guy and being good friends, and what their sex life was, what their romantic life was. And then they weren't feeling that they were represented very well in anything, in any kind of content. So they wrote it themselves. And so the production on this is basically, the interesting side to this is that Ivan Reitman, who is at this point a megastar by 1988 when the film comes out, he is a megastar producer, director, writer, and he's looking for projects. And the reason he's looking for projects, Rich, is because his wife just finished the AFI training for the American Film Institute training for being a director. And she ends it like, and basically what happens is Genevieve Robert makes one movie, Rich, and it's this movie.
Spoiler alert.
She makes one movie and it's this movie, but this is the movie that her and her husband picked out for her to kind of, get her teeth, get something that raw meat that she could really grind her teeth on. And when you start reading about some of the stuff that happened, first off, the play when they were doing it, the Groundling sketch was supposed to run for 8 weeks. It ended up running for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it hit some nerves and did some things, and basically, and Reitman was going to produce it himself, but eventually Universal gets into the picture, and they're looking at it and they say, we want to make this movie. And Reitman at that point was going to cast the two ladies who wrote it and who performed it every week at the Groundlings, Wendy Goldman and Judy Toll. But once Universal gets involved, Universal says, you guys are great in LA. You have every right to audition for the roles in your movie, your play that you've been doing for a year. You can audition for the roles of the people you're actually living the life of.
Mm-hmm.
And so they audition. They, of course, don't get it. They want to cast proven stars. They go with Leah Thompson and they go with Viictoria Jackson. And so, when you start reading about it, it gets a little bit tingy with the idea that these two women performed the show for a year. They wrote and performed the movie. They had thoughts about it being a movie musical. You know what I mean? Think La La Land before La La Land happened, right? And then basically Universal comes in, it becomes a much bigger production, and they don't get the roles. Then
this will not be the last time that the studio interferes with this film either.
No, that's the thing. Like, as production wears on, they do a test screening, Rich, and the test screening goes fucking abysmally. And the only thing that can be said about the test screening, the scores were so low that basically the only person that the test screening audiences liked was Andrew Dice Clay, which, don't get me wrong, and everyone should know that this movie takes place it was released in 1988. This is before the Dice Man character was created. The character in the movie is called the Vin Man. So it's a character that both and Judy Toll and Wendy Goldman were friends with him. Because he was making the rounds at all the comedy outlets in California at the time. So they championed getting him an audition and getting him a role, and they found him very funny. And this is, of course, all before the Dice Man character actually becomes whatever it is that it becomes in the 90s, the following year or whatever. So you have all this swirling around. Then the abysmal test scores. Then they start messing around. Universal starts messing around with the ending, because the ending of the show was apparently basically not about finding a man or finding true love or any of those things. The ending of the show is just them having a falling out and then them coming back together and being the best friends they're supposed to be. And they're still, they were still friends until one of them tragically passed away of cancer. So it's this really interesting thing where this one test audience completely rewrites the movie into what we get, which is this weird, Andrew Dice Clay reconciling, and it's the only movie where Andrew Dice Clay gets the girl.
It's the only movie where Andrew Dice Clay realizes his actions are kind of asshole-ish.
Are terrible. Yes.
And he works and strives to actively become a better person.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's because I'm looking at it through hindsight of his career, and I'm saying, I don't know. I don't know if this works or not, or if it's just bad on paper, no matter when you're watching it. It doesn't work. And Leah Thompson, in one interview I did come across, she says, she was disappointed with that ending. She didn't like it. And she had said, the studio kind of imposed this on us after that test screening.
Yeah, because it does a weird jump. The movie jumps. It jumps from. So the movie involves them going to an Oasis spa and then it jumps to 6 months, and then it jumps to 6 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, so all of the stuff all the good stuff that they had in the show basically goes by the wayside because of the production. Some comments. Hold on. We're good. Let's see.
And
The movie I realized I will never like Andrew Dice Clay. It's, again, it was an act, and I'm not going to say I'm never going to like him, because I'm going to be honest. The last few movies, the Blue Jasmine, he's been really good in.
Blue
He was
Jasmine.
fantastic in A Star Is Born. So he has potential to not be a jaghole, and be a decent actor. And then Joe writes, I was 12 when this movie came out. It flew under the radar for me. At 12, I definitely would have watched a Dice Man movie if I had known. Yes, but realize at 12 when this came out, he wasn't the Dice Man yet.
No, we were still 3 years away from Fort Fairlane.
And one of the things that comes up is, and one of the things that actually, there was an episode of SNL that is clearly mentioned in all the writings about this movie, where a lot of the cast members did not want to participate because of Andrew Dice Clay. But Viictoria Jackson was one of the people that said, look, comedy is comedy. I'm never going to insult a host that was picked. And, and they're like Nora Dunn, a few of the others walked off the set and refused to be, because of the brand and level of misogyny that his comedy would eventually represent. But the production of the movie is this weird thing where it ceases to become a movie about the friendship, and it basically becomes a movie, a movie called Casual Sex with a question. Oh, that's the other thing. Universal adds a question mark. And Universal also has this whole interior thing that they hit them late in the production of, with what about the AIDS crisis that is going on in the world. Now, the show, played like from the 85 to 86, 87, and they didn't have any of those problems with regards to dealing with the crux of the AIDS crisis actually hits its fruition and starts, you start really seeing it's not just about homosexual men, it's about heterosexual people, and it starts to take a turn in 87, 88. And when this movie comes out, Universal says, well, we don't want to be responsible for a comedy that's making fun of something during the AIDS crisis. So it becomes another big thing that Universal kind of jams into the movie.
Which I think is to the movie's betterment, though. This is the one thing I think kind of works.
It does. It's one of the things that works, but not much, because I think there is a funny movie to be had about a woman who is worried about the AIDS crisis and starts going through her head of all the things that she's done. But to have it just sprung on them is kind of a hard thing for a writer and director to do. Now, the production on the movie, everything else is kind of normal, but like they filmed in the Reitman's house, the end sequence, the Christmas, with the big dog and the kids. By the way, one of the kids is Jason Reitman. Just so we're one of the kids dragging Andrew Dice Clay down to the Christmas tree is Jason Reitman, a famed film director right now. Hence the Ghostbuster shirt. And basically, it's just this weird amalgam thing where the thing that was one thing on a groundling stage that was supposed to be really like compact, tight, knew what it wanted to be about women friendship, becomes this movie about finding Mr. Right, and also realizing that Mr. Sluggo over here can also become a Mr. Right if he transforms himself and doesn't act like a complete douchebag in the second half of the movie. It's a weird production thing, though. Like, the amount of talent involved behind the scenes, and then you couple it with the amount of ticky-tack shit that Universal kind of, like, put on the talent. Like, this one test screening, and that's the thing. That is the one thing you always hear about this movie, is there was one abysmal test screening, and Universal used those test scores to reshape the last third of the movie. And so it is kind of like a, you know, as you're reading about it, it becomes one of those things it's one of the movies where the test screenings really kind of like force rewrites, force a shift. Like like I said, I don't know who was in this test screening, but they loved Andrew Dice. They loved Andrew Dice Clay, and when they did love Andrew Dice Clay, Universal said, "Well, can we get more of him? And can he be redeemed somehow?" And that happens.
Oh
And
yeah.
and the movie is not necessarily good for it. So production, you know, is kind of a messy thing, and like I said, one of the more interesting things coming out of the production, Rich, is Genevieve Ribera never makes another movie. Nope.
Well, I don't know if she was soured on the experience, and I certainly couldn't blame her if she was, or if because this doesn't do really well at the box office, no one was willing to give her that second chance, even with, you know, Ivan Reitman producing again, perhaps. The, I mean, it's a decently you know, directed film. The camera's pointed in the right direction. You know, the character motivations and everything seem relatively real and organic. I think the relationship between the two friends, between, you know, really works well, despite them having separate ideas about sex. And for that, I think all of that stuff works. Probably maybe even a little bit better than it should have, given all the
I
crap
think
Universal was forcing on them
I
at the
think
time.
the other interesting thing production wise is this is one of the true Renaissance movies because it had two female writers, female director, and many
Mhm.
parts of the crew, including like director of photography and like a bunch of other things, were all women. So it was a unique preposition, and the interesting thing there is it's a unique preposition about a woman movie being directed by a woman, written by women, with crew women, and then the movie kind of shifts and becomes a movie about trying to find true love and uh, rehabilitating a total douchebag character from the club into a better
Mhm.
man because he reads a book, by the way, that's about seducing women to be an ass, be when you're actually an
Faking
asshole,
sincerity.
faking sincerity. So it the box office, as you said, Rich, um, that is a sour thing. Let's go to the numbers, Rich. Um, it,
Oh
it,
boy.
yeah, it grosses $12 million. It's released in April of 1988, April 22nd, 1988. It grosses $12 million. Its opening weekend is 3.8 million. It lasts about 3 weeks in theaters. The adjusted box office would be about $31 million, so it wouldn't be low for a romantic comedy. Like if you look at something like if you know something like from this summer, right? You look at say Joyride, right?
Mhm.
Which we were talking about earlier. Um, you're talking about Joyride grossed 15. Joyride grossed about 15 million worldwide. This grossed 12 million worldwide. So you're looking at like a adjusted box office where it would have beaten Joyride by a lot.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's an interesting kind of, you know, when you're looking at the numbers, it's not a major hit, but for something that was so special in the sense of all these women are a part of it.
With this
You know,
pedigree and what this movie could have been saying, instead of being watered down the way it
well,
was.
watered down, very watered down. Also, this movie employs what I view as it's really funny. I watched this today and I watched No One Will Save You today, and they're the complete opposite with regards to like this movie has a lot of narration. It has a lot of like looking at directly at the camera in the middle of scenes that I'm sure work great on stage as a stage device. Fantastic. right?
I don't know.
But
Go
it's
ahead, because I
well,
don't
then,
think I'm gonna agree with you.
okay, but as a stage device, I think they work fine. You know, you're breaking the fourth wall, and you kind of go
Mhm.
out. You're in the middle of a scene, and everybody else stops, and the character walks forward on stage and says, "I can't believe I was in this situation," and or whatever they're gonna say. I just think it's one of those things where, for me, it doesn't quite work as well as I bet. Like the opening of the movie is them standing in a black space, like they're in the void, and
Mhm.
I just think it's, tell them about the letter or all this other stuff that they do when it's just them together. I would have just liked to see them kind of like not doing as much narration. I would have liked the idea that you can get across comedy scenes without doing the narration. That again, I think is a very, it can work. You know what I mean? Like Deadpool and things like it can totally
Yeah.
work. But I don't know that it works for these two characters in the moment of this film. I was watching it going, this is like everything they're saying is great, but I don't know that the delivery and the narration is great for me. I don't know that it worked, and I might have been the problem of watching No One Will Save You, and whereas it's the ultimate do movie, show me, don't tell me, and this movie is a lot of telling you and not a lot of doing, and it's slow.
That's fair. I look at it from a first person storytelling viewpoint
Yeah,
almost,
okay.
that the characters themselves are not just active participants in their stories, they're active participants in the telling of their story. That's why we have that opening, in a black void, and they kind of introduce themselves and say, "Hey, we're here to tell you this story." And then they're bringing us into their experience, um, as they're retelling it. And then that allows them to, like, if you were just telling me a story about something that happened to you a couple years back, where you could stop and go, "Can you believe this shit?" And then you go back into what's going on. So for me, that
I,
kind of
I
works.
got you.
Yeah.
I got
Um,
what should be said is the two actresses I like in this movie. I think that they're given some really good material. They're like, but Rich, another thing as a criticism I'm going to bring up, there is two good jokes, two really like there are funny situations and there are weird things that happen. But the jokes are few and far between. And the
yeah,
one
there's
I
not a lot of
really,
laugh out loud moments in this
the
movie,
one
or
I
even
really, the
moments.
one I really super chuckled and laughed out loud. There's a moment where Victoria Jackson's getting measured, and she like Levine, who played Styles in Teen Wolf, he puts the tape measure around her hips, and she goes, "It's not so much a measurement as it is a cruel joke from the family history." And I'm
Yes.
like, "That's funny. That's a
And that
female
when that line
organic."
actually stood out to me because it felt like it was like a stand-up line repurposed as a character line. Do you know
but
what I
it
mean?
but it repurposed perfectly for that character because
Oh yeah.
that character has
I
has shown throughout the beginning and toward the middle of the movie that character is shown as somebody who doesn't like how she looks even though she's beautiful
Mhm.
and she and her way of dealing with everything is to be like what was the other line that made me chuckle was we are what we eat or we are what we're made of and she goes, well then I would be made of ice cream. And I'm like, that's funny. Like,
Mhm.
and there are a couple like Victoria
I can
Jackson gets
believe
all those
that
lines.
one, if not both of those lines, are directly lifted out of the original show, and they
I bet
might
you
be
they
the
are.
only
They might
lines
be
that.
the only things out of the original
Yeah.
show. And so but she gets both of those lines. Leah Thompson isn't quite as lucky. She gets to act moments. Almost all of her stuff. Like the most interesting thing for me watching the movie today was how pro monogamy and how pro abstinence and also it reminded me a little bit of the Seinfeld episode with Izzy Spongeworthy. Do you know what I mean? Like there are
Yeah.
moments in the movie where it's like the Victoria Jackson character, I think, comes across much better. She's not interested in sex. The people she's had sex with are not great. They're not good lovers, and they're also not. They don't appear to be good men either. And so, like, I think she has the easier road to hoe, as opposed to Leah Thompson, who is consistently slut shamed in the movie. Right? There's a whole thing about, like, making the wrong decisions. There's a doctor's office visit that's kind of like she's reading the AIDS epidemic thing with a Time magazine, and I was sitting there going, I'm feeling really bad for Leah Thompson, but then I also realized this is the movie that got Leah Thompson out of playing teenager roles. So she had to do it. The recreations of I do like some of the groundlings and improv comedy stuff that I see within it. Like, there's two things that I like from an improv, like, I have an improv background. Of course, working at the Scranton Cultural Center with Chris Barnes. So the idea that they have a sequence where they're on the nude beach where they're both having dream sequences is literally a game we used to play in the Scranton Cultural Center basement called, dream scenario, dreamscape, or whatever we did. And basically you just, like, you're having, like, her dreams are all negatively about the men that she's, like, she touched one guy's boner, and, like, all those things, like, they all get wrapped up into the dream sequence. And Victoria Jackson's is she's basically at the altar, and every man in the room wants to marry her. And she's like, it was the greatest dream ever. I don't know why. And Leah Thompson has to tell her she's horny. You're horny. That was your big turn on is somebody that would love you unconditionally and marry you. Right? Mary Gross has a small role. She's like, she's kind of like this person that attaches to them as like a third character at the club, this Oasis spa that's sort of club
disappears almost immediately though. After a certain point. She's just
well, she's extra. She's like, things happen to her, or she goes, yeah, did you see that person? Or so she doesn't get a lot to do, even though she has the SNL kind of brand to it. I came out of the movie going, I feel it could have been so much more. And also, I feel it could have been, I don't know. I just feel it could have been more.
It's funny because I kind of took a look through the cast, and I didn't see anybody that was jumping out to me as even being from the Groundlings. Mary Gross is Second City in Chicago, as is Danny Breen, who's probably a semi-familiar face if you watched a lot of stuff back in the 80s. He's the guy who played the doctor.
Yes. There's also, I believe, one of the cops from Police Academy is one of the suitors as well.
Yeah.
So they're
also Second City in Chicago. But he's like one of those guys that you're just watching TV and it's like, oh, he's on Seinfeld. He's on Dream On.
That's another miss. That's another miss for the production. Couldn't you have found, like, when they get to the spa, like, I feel you could have found some groundlings that you could have sprinkled throughout that spa that make it a little bit more interesting than the Club Med experience it has. I don't know. As I was watching it, I was just like, I was having all kinds of feelings, and then I was like, then I started looking up at the old reviews, and the old reviews are brutal. Like, not all brutal, but some of them are really brutal. Like Variety, although Variety gave it kind of a backhanded compliment. With the late 80s, 1980s sensibility, their sex conversations are peppered with the girls finding their own identities in relationships with men outside the sex act. Is it mature? Yes. Is it funny? No. Janet Maslin also, aside from these confessional flourishes and the very infrequent bright remark, it was the early 80s and sex was still a good way to meet new people. The film is as ordinary as it can be. And it makes me sad a little bit that it's ordinary considering what we just said, Rich. It's got all this talent behind the camera. It's got all this talent in front of the camera. And it never it never ascends. Like, even with the movies we've looked at through this raunchy 80s thing, all of them have moments where they ascend to a a moment where there's, you know, like there's a like this movie's special. You know what I mean? Like, or this movie is something where you can hang your hat and go, you can recommend it, or you can say, have you seen it? And somebody's like, oh, I saw it, I love it. You know what I mean? Like, just one of the guys, Weird Science, Bachelor Party, Porky's are all movies at least you can hang something on. I'm dismayed at the sheer amount of talent, and the results are middling. Like
Yeah,
they're
I would say that, and this sounds like I'm damning it, but maybe I am. If you took the butt shots out, this could have been a sitcom almost. You know, a live act, you know, a one camera sitcom,
well,
because
there is a surprising lack of nudity for an '80s raunchy comedy. There's also
well,
surprising. There's a
I think we had reached that arc overall where we were moving away from
where
that anyway.
it was moving towards maturity, and that's the other thing. Like one of the things that I think you had earlier said that you thought bringing the AIDS crisis into it makes it. I think the AIDS crisis thing inserted into it is done as a corporation protecting itself. I don't necessarily view it as, because as we look back on it, I don't know that it's something that should be anywhere near a comedy. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I know it. Like, I think you could do a whole thing where instead
I
of
don't
that,
think they're I don't think they're making fun of the
oh
AIDS
no, I
crisis.
don't. No,
They were using it. They
I
were
didn't mean it
using
like
it
that.
as an inciting incident to have this character stop being as promiscuous as she was, and then start thinking about, oh, I'm just going to be by
There
myself for a
is
while. Oh no, being alone sucks. I think I should find myself somebody to settle down with. And that's ultimately the impetus
but
into
that's the
middle
interesting
film.
thing about it for me in the original show. And you know, when you read about you know, when you read about the two writers, right, that they had this amazing life together, Wendy Goldman and Judy Toll, where they worked together and worked together and worked, and they went on. When we talk in a moment, the legacy. Wait till you hear the stuff they worked on, because you're not going to believe it. But what I'm saying to you is, I think making the AIDS crisis the inciting riot for a comedy about for a sex comedy that theoretically should be a rom. I think it was done as a protection for the studio. I don't think it was done as the look what we can make it topical. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just think it's
I would be a little hesitant to apply that without actually talking to, you know, or hearing it from like the writers or the
direct.
directors.
Well,
This
I
is
know.
definitely, you know, the studio wanted their asses covered kind of a thing.
Well, no, I don't know that. I'm just
As
saying
opposed
for
to all the
me.
other bare asses we did see in this movie.
Yeah. I'm just saying from my perspective, when you tell me that they inserted it in, it was never part of the original show. It was something that kind of came to pass as the movie was progressing, and that you know Universal had a meeting where they basically said to Reitman and Robert and some of the writers, "Hey, this is a big thing that's happening. We need to try to include it in some way." I don't know it's as abysmal a choice as the test screening that somehow made the Vinman character into a viable Love Actually type. You know, like I don't know if that's I don't know
No,
what a worse decision is. But what I would
I
say,
think updating the material, and I think it's interesting because we only have like 2 or 3 years from when the original material was written to when they started to write this screenplay and make this movie, and that's how quickly the AIDS crisis exploded.
went from
Yeah,
hey, it's
you know,
only gay people,
my high
and
school
now
years,
it's
I was not happy about the AIDS crisis. Trust me.
well, no, I
But
was worried about it because we had a lot of like my family is always like we had a lot of gay friends. We had at least 2 or 3 people that we knew. We didn't know like at the time when somebody got really sick and passed away, we didn't know what it was. They just got a pneumonia and they passed away suddenly. And then you know you start reading about different things, and then you realize you know you start putting two and two together. But that's one thing that did come out of it, and this is a great like the legacy that this movie kind of like you know I think topical comedy is one of them. Like where you sort of look at it and like go, hey, these are these are things where things get added and they move around and they do different things, and the idea that somehow you can make it important to the society it's making the jokes for. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I think that's part of it, part of the legacy. I think I think when you talk about what they did, like, you know, practically when you make the Dice Man character, the Vin Man character, a bad legacy is that it made it okay for him to kind of continue to create the character to become the Dice Man, who eventually becomes like a firebrand slash just lightning bolt of kind of like a major comedy star who's also like offending half the population. You know what I mean? So I think that's an interesting legacy. What about you? What else do you see?
Um, like I said, regardless of the reasons why it was in there, this is the first movie to address the AIDS crisis, and I think it's kind of important that that does come in what's ostensibly supposed to be a sex comedy. Um, it it marks and I think this is also part of the turning point of why the sex comedy kind of died died by and was a dead subgenre by the end of the 80s in just another couple of years, simply because of the AIDS crisis and the Reagan administration's refusal to do anything about it for several years, or even acknowledge it was existing, without kind of like looking at subsequent movie releases over the next 2 or 3 years. We really, this is where it does, excuse the phrase, peters out. And,
Yeah,
we
the
don't get
raunchy
anything
comedy
for
goes
several years until like
mid mid
the
nineties.
American Pie franchise.
Yeah, until like '93.
Yeah.
So other like so just a couple things. Leah Thompson comes out of this and basically doesn't have to play a kid anymore. So she gets to do Caroline in the City, which is a show from the '90s that was actually a really well received kind of TV comedy.
Mm-hmm.
She's also become one of like because of like what she learned on all of her films. She becomes one of the great direct. She's a behind the scenes director of a lot of TV shows that you may not know about.
She
Judy
worked
Toll
on
and Wendy,
Stargirl for a couple seasons.
yeah, Judy Toll and Wendy Goldman. Listen to this list and realize that this is the movie that started this particular kind of like these two working together and as a consultant and as people of writer of episodes. They wrote episodes of Six in the City. They started a show called Suddenly Susan with Brooke Shields and Kathy Griffin. They did a show called All Right Already, starring Carol Leifer. Gina Davis's
Mm-hmm.
show they did a show on MTV called Faking It. They did a TV adaptation, 10 Things I Hate About You. They did a Jenny McCarthy show on UPN called The Bad Girl's Guide. And they also did a Patricia Heaton, Linda Lavin Room for Two show. Judy Toll died of cancer at the age of 44. And then but all of these things kind of like, um, she think about all like a Sex in the City show where the comedy there is a direct DNA descendant of this movie. Do you know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
Like that, it's a direct descendant. Um, you also have, you know, Genevieve Ribera doesn't direct anymore, but she does make one appearance in Dave for Ivan Reitman. She's in the movie Dave. She's the vice president's wife. Mary Gross goes on to a series of supporting roles. This is her first post SNL role. She does uh, the Bette Midler, Lily Tomlin movie Big Business. She stars in a movie called Feds, which she's a co-lead in, which is another female-orientated uh, a cop comedy, and she stars in Troop Beverly Hills. So she has a nice little niche corner career that um, she basically ended her career recently uh, in the last 10 years because she started to lose the ability to hear. So that's a sad thing because she was a talented comedic actress in almost anything she's in. And Jerry Levine is the last one I'm going to mention, right? Because he played Styles in Teen Wolf, but he also directed a lot of comedies that you would like. Boy, he was a big purveyor of the show Boy Meets World. He directed full episodes of that, and he later ran that show. And then he also worked on Everybody Hates Chris. So he's definitely stayed in comedy, but he went behind the scenes. It's a real interesting place for the franchise viability. But when you say to somebody, and one of the things about our show that I love is that we tie things together. Casual Sex is the grandmother of Sex and the City.
Yeah,
it is, and it like when you start putting pieces together, like they make this movie called Casual Sex, and then these writers later go on and help write Sex and the City. It really, the DNA strand is there, and it's what makes our show special.
Ultimately, what this movie should have been about was the friendship between the two women, and Sex and the City is nothing but the friendship of the four women.
Right, the men are superfluous.
Their love lives should be kind of secondary to that. And
this is also. Did you know that this is one of the first movies where the Bechdel test came into play? Did you ever hear that thing? Yeah,
I heard of the Bechdel test. Yeah, but I didn't know that it was it coined specifically in regards to this movie.
No, it wasn't. No, it was just. This is one of the movies that I had read somewhere. The Bechdel test. This is one of the movies that fails the Bechdel test, even though it has a director, a female director, female cast members, female crew workers, and all these women talk about is the men in their lives. They never, which is odd because the show with the Groundlings was about the friendship. Do you know what I mean? Like, this could have been one of those, like, one of those movies that we talk about and we just, we never forget as a movie where women were behind the scenes, behind the cameras, in front of the cameras. And it could be a movie that we're going to see more of now, right? Because now is a moment in time where women are doing women crews and women cast and women directors and women writers. And it's definitely, it was a legacy movie before it was cool to have all of those crew people being women. So I give it props for that. I was coming out of it going, I don't know that it's a movie I will ever watch again. Is that horrible to say?
No. I mean, there's a lot of movies you're one and done on. And
one that came up, another one that came up.
This, at some point, if I was doing a survey about, AIDS and cinema, I think this might be
an interesting thing to do.
Now this isn't like the first movie to ever talk about the AIDS crisis, but because there's other indie films that came out beforehand, and there are even some films that
first mainstream Hollywood movie to talk about that. First mainstream Hollywood movie to studio movie to talk about that.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of like going back to the movie Liquid Sky from from about 4 years earlier, 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
Where they kind of dealt with AIDS in an allegorical sense. So this is, it's like we said, it's revolutionary for a Hollywood film to reference it. It's to reference it. And I think this is, definitely a turning point in the whole sex comedy genre history. And that might be a reason to go back and look at it again if I were doing a similar survey to like what we did here.
I would also say that the interesting thing about it is, and it is a sex comedy that is almost also very devoid of chuckles. So like, you smile, you may laugh a little bit. Like, again, the two Viictoria Jackson lines that I thought she delivers them, they knock them out. She knocks them out of the park when she delivers them. She has the giggly smile, like, "Oh, if it's what we eat, I'm all ice cream." Like, it's gold. But like, if you're going into it, be prepared. It's not nearly as funny as you think it could be when they start playing the music and everything's going to be a great kind of like.
if you're looking for a fun, saucy comedy, this is maybe not one to look at.
It's not
If you're
Bridesmaids.
looking, yeah,
It's not Bridesmaids.
if you're interested in the history of this genre, though, I would say, yeah, definitely look at this because I think it's kind of important as a linchpin there. Even
right.
where
it's an important movie about female friendships. So, like,
Mhm.
Bridesmaids is another thing that comes out of this, and you know, all of those movies were, you know, like Joyride and female friendships being tested, are all owe a little bit to this movie. So, that's the end of our '80s raunch thing. Rich, it's over. It's over. Go home. Go home. But as you know, it's spooky season.
Ooh.
And next week, as promised, I gotta tell you, can I tell you, part of my pleasure in this show is finding posters. But these posters are much older posters. So next week we begin our journey through a month of Hammer films. We're gonna have 4 of them. The schedule is gonna be a little bit weird next month, but we promise they're gonna be good shows. And we start with, and look at this poster, Rich. It's glorious. Next week, our Hammer Film Festival / journey through spooky of Hammer. Technicolor blood and just gore and fun. This is it. Look at this poster, Rich.
Woo.
No one who saw it lived to describe it. Peter Cushing, Hazelcourt, Robert Ucourt, Christopher Lee is The Creature, a Hammer film production released by Warner Brothers with the old Warner Brothers logo. Certified X in London with Eastman color. Beautiful. We start with The Curse of Frankenstein, Rich, and it's one of the first it's not the first Hammer horror film, but it's the first Hammer horror film that struck a chord with audiences both here and abroad. So, and when I say here, I mean London, and when I mean abroad, I mean here, where we are. Because it's the first one that completely reinvigorates our love affair with movie monsters that had kind of waned in the 40s and 50s. You know, we had all the Universal horror films in the 30s. It wanes in the 40s and 50s. 50s, westerns take over. But then this movie and this company, this Hammer company, take over, and they kind of reinvigorate horror and create horror fans with everyone they touch. People, I watched Hammer horror films with my dad as a kid, and I believe they scared the bejesus out of me, and I can't wait to revisit them. Where can people find you before they revisit us next week with The Curse of Frankenstein?
All right. You can find all of my writing at FILMBUFFonline.com. We have, as I teased beforehand, our comic book film editor emeritus, Bill Gadavaskis, delivering a reply to the most recent Martin Scorsese quotes about comic book films. That's going to be tomorrow.
Can't wait. I cannot wait to read it because I feel it's very similar to my reaction. Like, shut the
earlier or late last week, we had a piece. I had my piece on Talking Heads Stop Making Sense 40th anniversary.
And a great box office weekend, by the way.
Glorious in IMAX. If you have an IMAX near you, you still have a couple days to go hit it in IMAX. This coming Friday, it just shifts to regular theaters. Still go see it. It's a beautiful film. It's a joyous film. It's if you don't get up and dance, I'm just going to assume you have broken legs.
Or no soul.
It's wonderful.
No soul or broken leg.
And you can find Film Buff Online on Facebook as well. We also do on that page some additional history posts, things like that to help, keep you informed, keep you educated about all of the movie history. I have a second podcast that I do with my good friend Natasha Bogutsky, who's been on this show here with us. And
causes trouble every time she's on, Rich.
I know. I know.
I love it.
This week, actually, we just recorded the episode a couple of hours ago, and I have it mostly edited. We're talking about the Betty Davis classic, Now Voyager,
Got
as a
that at the
retro
Kirby, didn't
review.
you? Didn't you catch the
Hmm?
Kirby
Yeah,
together?
we saw it at the Kirby about 2 weeks ago.
Very jealous.
Beautiful on a big screen. And we also have a little bit of a discussion about the Writers Guild strike ending and a few other things in the news before we lead into that discussion. I hope to have that out tomorrow by noon on your feeds. So you can find us at bigpicturepod.com or iTunes, iTunes and Google Play. Not Stitcher, because Stitcher doesn't exist anymore. But
I thought you were gonna say it. I'm like, really? You're going through space and time.
Yes, and
but-
you can also find the links to that podcast on filmbuffonline.com, and I can be found on Twitter and on Blue Sky as Film Buff Rich.
So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and the Twitter, the X, or whatever the fuck it is going to be tomorrow. JW the Movie Guy. I also do a little podcast on Tuesday nights called Loud and Nerdy. That's going to continue for the time being, and we're going to work on things as we progress. But we have a big show tomorrow night. I'm sure we're going to have some people in. We're going to talk some box office. We're going to talk the writer's strike. I undoubtedly will talk more about No One Can Save You, and so many other things. I'm going to catch a couple of things tonight, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow.
I'll let you in on a secret. It's always going to be Twitter on my phone because I am refusing to update the app at this point. Because I know the second I update the app, I'm going to get the X icon there. Screw that. It's going to be Twitter until I quit the app.
The little birdie was so happy, and now it's like an angry X. It looks like an X that like is on a movie that's not really good enough to be an X-rated movie, like Curse of Frankenstein. But we'll see everybody next week. Curse of Frankenstein next week. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hammer horror and the spooky season is here. Go see a movie. Creator this week. Thursday is going to be big.
Dumb Money is really good.
Dumb Money's still out.
Stop
yeah,
Making Sense Again are the two that I would recommend.
There's a lot of good movies out there right now, and as we get in October, it's gonna like the good independent small movies are gonna get pushed out as we get bigger, more studio focused movies. So have a great night. See everybody next week for The Curse of Frankenstein and Hammer Film.